A mother starts her day by secretly paying off her son's entire mortgage, wanting to lift the crushing weight of debt from his shoulders and give him financial freedom. That very evening, at the dinner table, he repays her love by calling her useless to her face. He has no idea that his useless mother just handed him a debt-free life, and her quiet reaction to his cruel words is about to change everything. Hello everyone, and welcome to our 10th story together. Your support has been incredible. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you're the first to see what happens next. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The bank manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, smiled at me from across his large polished desk. "That's it, Sharon," he said, sliding the final signed document towards me. "The wire transfer is complete. As of 10:32 this morning, the mortgage on your son's property is paid in full. He is officially debt-free." A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me, so powerful it almost brought tears to my eyes. For 5 years, I had watched my son, Greg, and his wife, Laura, struggle under the immense weight of their mortgage. They were good people, hardworking, but the stress of the payments was a constant shadow in their lives. Using the inheritance my late husband left me to lift that shadow, to give them a true sense of freedom and security, felt like the most meaningful thing I could possibly do. I pictured Greg's face when he received the official letter from the bank. I imagined his relief, his joy. It was a secret I could barely wait to see revealed. That evening, I went to their house for dinner. It was a weekly tradition, but tonight felt different for me. I looked at the walls of their beautiful home, the home I had just secured for them, and I felt a quiet, glowing pride. I was a part of its foundation now, in a way no one else knew. The atmosphere, however, was tense. Greg had just come home from work and was clearly stressed. He was short with Laura and barely acknowledged my presence beyond a cursory, "Hey, Mom." I tried to brush it off. He was a loan officer at a competitive firm. Stressful days were part of the job, but his dark mood seemed to linger, casting a pall over the dinner table. The conversation eventually turned to summer plans. Laura mentioned that her sister was taking her family to a lovely resort in the Carolinas. "It sounds so nice," she said wistfully. "Maybe we could do something like that next year." Greg let out a short, bitter laugh. "On what money, Laura? In case you've forgotten, we're barely treading water here. Every spare dime goes into this house." His voice was sharp, and he jabbed his fork towards the plate in front of him. I decided to try and help, to gently nudge him towards the good news he didn't yet know. "Well, sometimes things have a way of working out, dear," I said softly. "You never know what good fortune is just around the corner." He turned his gaze on me, and his eyes were cold. "What would you know about it?" he snapped. "Your bills are a fraction of ours. You don't have to deal with the pressure, the deadlines, the constant fear of falling behind." "Greg," Laura warned, her voice low, but he ignored her. He was fixated on me, his stress finding a convenient target. "I'm talking about real-world problems, Mom," he continued, his voice rising. "Things you don't have to worry about. You don't bring anything to the table in these conversations because you just don't get it. With all due respect, in this, you're useless." Useless. The word landed with a physical force, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. The joy from that morning, the secret pride, the love that had propelled my grand gesture, it all vanished in an instant, replaced by a glacial, creeping cold. I had spent the morning making the single greatest financial contribution to his life, and he had spent the evening dismissing my entire existence as worthless. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly cruel. It was almost poetic. I looked at my son, at his angry, stressed face, and I didn't see my child. I saw a stranger who had no concept of the love that surrounded him. Laura was staring at him, her mouth agape in horror. "Greg, for God's sake, apologize to your mother right now," she whispered furiously. But I held up a hand, a gesture that was surprisingly steady. I calmly placed my napkin on the table, my movements slow and deliberate. The heat of anger was absent. The sting of tears was absent. All I felt was a vast, empty clarity. I stood up from the table, the very table in the very house that was now his, free and clear because of me. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice quiet and even, carrying across the stunned silence of the room. "You've made your position very clear." I turned and walked to the front door, retrieved my coat, and let myself out into the cool night air, leaving my son and his wife alone in their newly paid-for house, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just insulted his savior. I've only just begun this story, but believe me, it's about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the hero faces an even greater injustice. The drive home was a silent 20-minute eternity. The usual landmarks of my neighborhood, the old oak tree, the corner store, the park where I used to take Greg to play, all seemed alien, like scenery in a movie about someone else's life. The word useless echoed in my mind, a ricocheting bullet that tore through 40 years of memories. Every baked good for a school fundraiser, every costume sewn by hand, every late-night helping with homework, every penny saved for his college fund. All of it rendered useless by a single cruel word spat out over a dinner of pot roast. The joy and pride I had felt that morning at the bank seemed like a distant, naive dream. It was a gift given by a woman my son didn't even see anymore. When I got home, I didn't cry. The pain was too sharp, too crystalline for tears. I walked through my quiet house, the same house Greg had grown up in, and felt like a ghost. I went to my desk and pulled out the folder from the bank. I looked at the document, the one with the bold, satisfying words, "Paid in full." This piece of paper was supposed to be a symbol of my love, a secret key to my son's happiness. Now it felt like evidence of my own foolishness. I had given a life-changing gift to a man who saw me as a burden. The thought was a cold, heavy stone in my gut. I had wanted to free him from his financial stress, but I had only just learned the true poverty of his character. For the next 2 days, I didn't hear from him. I knew Laura would have been furious with him, and I could only imagine the tense, angry silence in that house, the house I had paid for. The silence from him was telling. A good man, a man with a conscience, would have been at my door an hour after I left, begging for forgiveness. Greg's silence was the silence of a man who believed, deep down, that he was right. He was waiting for me to get over it, to come back into the fold as the quiet, unassuming, useless mother he was comfortable with. He had no idea that the woman who had walked out of his house on Sunday night was not the same woman who had walked in. On Wednesday morning, my resolve took shape. I had spent 2 days in a state of cold, quiet shock. Now it was time for action. The bank would have sent the official notification of the paid mortgage to Greg's house by now. He would know what I had done. And I knew his reaction wouldn't be one of pure gratitude. It would be complicated, tainted by his own guilt and the dawning, horrified realization of what he had said to me just hours after I had saved him. His apology, when it came, would not be genuine. It would be a panicked attempt at damage control. I decided I would not give him the chance. I called my lawyer. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I need to draw up some documents for a new family trust, and I also need you to draft a letter for me, to my son." I spent an hour on the phone outlining my plan. It was precise, It was final. It was not born of anger, but of a profound and painful clarity. I was not seeking revenge. I was creating consequences. I was rebalancing the scales that my son had so carelessly tipped over. When I hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over me. Greg had called me useless, a non-contributor. He was about to learn in the most legally binding way possible exactly what my useless contribution was worth. The next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Greg's doorstep. It wasn't a greeting card. It wasn't an angry letter. It was a cold, legal document from my lawyer's office. Inside was a statement detailing the full, final payment of his mortgage, a gift valued at over $450,000. And tucked behind it was another document, the official formation of the Vance Family Trust, into which I had transferred all my remaining assets, and finally, a single, simple letter from me. It contained only 2 sentences. So that you may never again worry about the real-world problems of your mortgage. I trust this contribution will be useful. The courier confirmed delivery at 11:15 a.m. a day later. At 11:18 a.m., my phone began to ring. It was Greg. I looked at his name on the screen, took a calm sip of my tea, and silenced the call. He called again immediately. I silenced it again. A string of frantic texts followed. "Mom, pick up. We need to talk. Mom, please. I'm coming over." I didn't reply. This was not a conversation to be had over the phone, nor was it one to be had on his frantic, guilt-ridden timeline. I held all the cards now, and I would play them at my own pace. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and went into the garden to tend to my roses. I would wait. He arrived less than an hour later. I heard his car pull into the driveway far too quickly. Through the kitchen window, I saw him practically run to the door. He looked pale and frantic. When I finally opened the door, he stood there, the thick envelope from my lawyer in his trembling hand. He looked like a man who had just been shown a ghost. "I got this," he said, his voice hoarse. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the envelope as if it had personally wounded him. I don't know what to say." "Then perhaps you should say nothing," I replied, my voice even. I didn't invite him in. I just stood in the doorway, creating a physical barrier that mirrored the new emotional one between us. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were filled with a horrified shame. It was the look of a man who had just been forced to see himself in a mirror for the first time in years. "Useless," he whispered, the word tasting like poison in his own mouth. "I called you useless. My God, Mom, it was the ugliest, stupidest, most disgusting thing I have ever said in my life. I am so sorry." His apology hung in the air between us. It sounded genuine. His shame was certainly real, but sorry wasn't enough. It couldn't erase the ease with which he had dismissed me. "I have only one question for you, Greg," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Why would you say that to me?" He flinched, the question clearly more painful than any scolding I could have delivered. I saw him struggle, the glib excuses dying on his lips before they could form. He had to give me the real answer. We both knew it. He finally broke, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Because I was drowning," he confessed, his voice cracking. "Because the firm is putting incredible pressure on me. Because we've been living paycheck to paycheck for a year, using credit cards to fill the gaps. Because I felt like a failure who couldn't provide for his own family. And looking at you so calm and stable made me feel even worse." He finally met my eyes. So I lashed out. I made you the target for my own fear and my own feelings of inadequacy. It was cruel, and it was pathetic, and I know it's no excuse. He had finally told the truth. The raw, ugly, pathetic truth. He hadn't seen me as a person that night. He had seen me as a symbol of the stability he craved and resented. I listened to his confession, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the old maternal pity. But it was distant now, separated from me by the chasm his words had created. He stood there waiting for my verdict, waiting for me to absolve him, to tell him it was okay, to welcome him back into the fold. But some things, once broken, can't be instantly mended. Some words, once spoken, can never be truly unheard. "I hear you, Greg," I said, and my voice was soft, but it offered no comfort. "I hear your reasons, but I also heard your words." I looked at my son, this man who was a stranger to his own finances and his own character. An apology doesn't fix this. I need time. I need a great deal of time to think about what our relationship looks like now. I stepped back, my hand on the doorknob. "I think you should go home." The month that followed was the quietest of my life. I requested that Greg give me space, and for the first time in his adult life, he listened without argument. There were no pleading phone calls, no long, dramatic emails. The silence was absolute, a vast, empty space that I needed to fill with my own thoughts, not his apologies. I gardened. I had lunch with old friends. I reread my favorite novels. I lived my life, and in the quiet, I began to process the wound. The sharp, searing anger began to cool, leaving behind the dull, heavy ache of a deep bruise. I had raised a son who, when faced with his own feelings of failure, had chosen to use me as a shield and a target. The knowledge was a bitter pill, but one I knew I had to swallow to move forward. His attempts to communicate were small, tentative, and blessedly wordless. Every Tuesday, my garbage bins would be at the curb in the morning and back by my garage in the afternoon, a task he knew I struggled with. One Saturday, I came home from the grocery store to find my front lawn had been perfectly mowed. There was no note, no text message asking for praise, just the quiet act of service. He was trying to show me, not tell me. He was trying to be useful. The irony was not lost on me, but for the first time, it didn't sting. It was just sad. It was the penance of a man who didn't know how else to say he was sorry. The real breakthrough came from Laura. She called me about 2 weeks into the silence. Her voice was hesitant, full of a shame that wasn't hers to carry. "Sharon," she started, I don't even know what to say. Thank you isn't a big enough word. You've given us a new life. And I am so sorry for how Greg spoke to you." I listened as she told me about the nights of long, hard conversations they were finally having. She told me Greg had broken down and admitted the full extent of the financial pressure he'd been under, the jealousy he felt towards his more successful colleagues, the crushing weight of feeling like he was failing as a husband and a father. "It's the first time he's ever been that honest with me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's different. He's talking to a therapist. He's trying, Sharon. He really is." Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't realize was still so raw. It wasn't Greg's apology I needed to hear. It was the proof of his transformation. It was knowing that this awful, painful event had forced him to finally confront the demons he had been wrestling with by lashing out at me. He had been a boy playing a man's game, and the shock of it all had finally forced him to grow up. My anger, which had been a towering wall, began to crumble, replaced by a weary, cautious kind of love. He was still my son. He had been foolish and cruel, but he was not a monster. He was just a flawed man who had made a terrible mistake. I knew our old relationship was gone forever, the easy, unthinking dynamic of a mother who constantly gave and a son who casually took was over. His words had shattered that mold, but perhaps in its place we could build something new, something more honest, something forged in the hard truth of what had happened between us. A relationship where I was not just a useless background character, but a person with her own strength and her own limits. A relationship where he was not just a son, but a man accountable for his own actions. After another 2 weeks of quiet, I knew I was ready. The anger had been processed. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar, a reminder of a lesson learned by both of us. On a bright Thursday morning, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, his voice tentative. "Mom?" "Hello, Greg," I said, my voice calm and even. "I was wondering if you might be free for dinner on Sunday. Just the two of us, here, at my house." The silence on the other end was filled with a palpable, fragile hope. "Yes," he said finally, his voice thick. "Yes, Mom, I'd like that very much." The first brick of our new foundation had been laid. We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. When Sunday arrived, I prepared a simple meal, the kind of comfortable, unfussy food we had shared 1,000 times before. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh green beans from my garden. I set the table for two. There was a nervous energy in the air, a feeling of fragility, as if we were two diplomats about to sign a treaty after a long and bitter war. This dinner wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about deciding what would happen next. I knew this one conversation could determine the future of our family, and I felt a strange sense of calm. The power was no longer just his, it was mine too. Greg arrived exactly on time, holding a small bouquet of my favorite freesias. It was a gesture he hadn't made in years. He looked tired, but the frantic, haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber humility. He was no longer the arrogant executive or the panicked child. He looked like a man who had spent a month in quiet, painful reflection. We sat down at the table, the silence stretching between us, filled only with the clink of silverware. He ate for a few minutes before finally putting his fork down and looking at me directly. "Mom," he began, his voice low and steady. "I've spent every day for the last month thinking about what I said. And I've realized that 'I'm sorry' is not enough. It's a meaningless phrase compared to the word I used." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I wasn't just stressed. I was ashamed. I felt like a failure, and I was angry at myself. And like a coward, I aimed all of that ugliness at you because you've always been the safest person in my life to lash out at. I took your unconditional love and used it as a weapon against you. Calling you useless. It wasn't just an insult. It was a lie I told myself to make my own failures feel smaller. It was the cruelest, most unforgivable thing I have ever done. And I understand if you can never look at me the same way again." I listened to him, really listened, and I heard the genuine remorse in his voice. I saw the profound shame in his eyes. This was the apology I had been waiting for. Not just an apology for the word, but an understanding of the weakness within himself that had produced it. "I accept your apology, Greg," I said softly. He looked up, a wave of relief washing over his face, but I held up a hand. "I accept it, and I forgive you. But you need to understand that things cannot go back to the way they were. That relationship is gone. The mother who would silently absorb your moods, and the son who felt entitled to treat her as he pleased. That dynamic is over." I continued, my voice firm but not unkind. "From now on, our relationship will be one of two adults, built on a foundation of mutual respect. I will always be your mother, and I will always love you. But I will no longer be your emotional punching bag or your silent, invisible safety net. I am a person, Greg, with my own feelings, my own contributions, and my own limits. I need you to see that person from now on." He nodded slowly, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I do, Mom," he whispered. "I finally do." We finished our meal in a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the tense, angry silence of our last dinner, nor was it the easy, unthinking chatter of the past. It was a thoughtful, respectful quiet. As we cleared the plates, I finally addressed the elephant in the room. "The house is yours. Free and clear, I said. That was a gift of love, and I will not undo an act of love no matter how badly it was received. He started to protest, to say he couldn't accept it, but I stopped him. You will accept it, I said, and every day you wake up in that house, I want you to remember this. I want you to remember the value of things you can't always see. I want you to remember what useless people can contribute. And most of all, I want you to remember that your father and I built our lives on a foundation of respect. A foundation I will now require from you. He looked at me, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw my son again. Not the boy, the man, a humbled, changed man. And in that moment, I felt a quiet, hopeful peace. Our family had been broken, but now we finally had a chance to build it back, stronger than before.